The Thing was one of the finest motion pictures ever made, directed by John Carpenter, one of the most legendary horror directors of all time. Many people ask the question, what is Carpenter's best movie? Is that Halloween, Escape from New York, or The Thing, just to give an example? It was an intensely dark film, The Thing, with an apocalyptic setting based in Antarctica, where American research scientists are being hunted by an invisible enemy that can imitate humans and assume their appearance. It invokes paranoia through its disconcerted characters, the feeling of being left in the cold for hours on end, and the amazing practical effects that no computer could ever hold a candle to. Now, of course, I'm talking about the film here, and we know that's a classic, but this video will be focused only on the Thing video game, with some references to the film when I feel fit. The game is fine, I guess. The main question I want to explore in this video is whether the Thing game is better than you remember, or is it just complete garbage. When it comes to the story, quote unquote, in the game, this game is directly connected to the end of the John Carpenter film, not to be confused with the original film. We see random Norwegians, not Swedes, getting consumed by a monster reminiscent of the creatures from the movie. Now, when I first installed this game, which is on free abandonware, I had to ensure all the language options were set to English, as the version I downloaded was the Russian version of the game. So I assumed that the language options weren't selected properly until the plot kicked off. And you can hear the main character Blake talking to his colonel on the walkie-talkie, and I then realised it was just part of the game. Computer Artworks decided this would be the best step forward for this licensed game, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But what were they thinking by giving us control of one of the most unlikable characters I have played in a long time?
What do you think it is, Captain?
I don't know, and I don't care.
You control Blake, who you can tell is trying to be as based as humanly possible, in the same way that RJ McCready was.
Now I'm gonna show you what I already know.
He sounds like Adam Sandler trying to do a Scarface impression.
I'm Snicky and I'm gonna kill all your suckers for no
But
reason.
all his shtick really is involving being lippy to his teammates and often condescending as well.
You scared the shit out of me. What are you doing here?
Let's skip the song and dance. Pierce is dead. I just want to get the hell out of here.
Of course, it is a pet peeve, but I do wonder why they gave us control of this character and not RJ McCready. Of course, they're looking to find out what went on in this Antarctic base, but I just think it would have been cooler if these characters found McCready and teamed up with him so we could explore the NPC tagging mechanics that the game's heavily focused on, almost to a fault, with an actual character that we like. Throughout the course of the game, you will find more people from both Blake's team and other squads as well. The game starts off in the base from the original film, and you even find the withered remains of Childs, who we find out is dead, but no sign of McCready. This crew we play as do not know anybody from that research team whatsoever, so it just becomes a matter of piecing everything together to build a picture of how much chaos has occurred. It was cool to make out landmarks from the film, even if it started in the dead of night, making it hard to see. This is one thing I did find disappointing about the game, and that was because it directly follows the movie, much of it is in the dead of night when you're outside, although interiors do end up being visually varied throughout, but I do think that getting to see the bases outside in the daytime would have been a nice touch. Or getting to have a day and night cycle like what you might see in PS2 GTA games, but it just wasn't meant to be. The themes of trust and distance is portrayed well throughout. Most of the game is scripted, especially when teammates get lost behind you when they transform into a
God
creature.
damn it. Pierce must have got lost behind me somewhere.
Like my dad always said, if you want a job done right, you gotta do it yourself.
Randomly, they just decide via the game developers that you can't go into a lift with Blake and then they meet their demise. I mean, what? Either way, I think the cutscenes and moments in-game when it comes to the sense of paranoia are proof the devs did watch the movie and analysed how they could portray it in-game, although I did find it strange that you've given most teammates a gun and that they will almost instantaneously trust you. It's clear there would have been more to this system if the hardware of the PS2 did not limit it as much as it did. The lead game designer, Andrew Curtis, would later state how there were huge problems with the squad command menu, and balancing encounters and resources for NPCs were more demanding than they previously thought. I'm paraphrasing this, but obviously what I'm trying to get across is the trust system is shallower than what originally was intended. Simply put, it was a system ahead of its time, which is both a good and a bad thing for the game going forward. It's good because it introduces an idea that could have been improved in sequels, something the original was meant to happen, with a second game being planned called The Thing 2, which fell through subsequently when Computer Artworks unfortunately had to go on to receivership, leading the project into cancellation. The game would have introduced a deeper trust system with more deceptive NPCs being included to shake up the system without as much of it being scripted, and there were hints that they may have attempted to allow more NPCs at one time to follow you to the end of the game. Honestly, the topic of The Thing 2 may be worth its own video one day, but for now it was the game us, The Thing film fans, wanted but sadly never got. The bad is, simply put, it can't be fleshed out the way that we want it to be in the 6th generation of consoles, and that's just a damn shame. Back to the Thing game, not the board game. And look, I have to get this out there right now. I just need to get this off my chest right now. For those wearing headphones, you might want to turn the volume down. It just has to be said. But why is everything in this series called The Thing? Why does everything in this series need to be called The Thing? Couldn't you have just called it, I don't know, the Thingamajig, or the fucking The Thing 2, or The Thing on PC, PS2, Xbox, you know, the Thing prequel in 2011? Like, why does everything in the series have to be called The Thing? Even the board game's called The Thing. Okay, look, I'll calm down now. Let's get back to the review. I would say this game has a bare bones story with not much going on. The fact the villain ends up being a character called Whitley who laughs during the first few scenes in the game, is that meant to shock us? We all know he's the colonel that Blake was taking orders from before realising he's been deceived by him. But it really does end up feeling like a nothing burger, and while I'm fine with a simple story because it's a sequel to one of the greatest horror films, forget that one of the greatest films of all time, I did expect better from the sequel. But I understand that they were aiming more for atmosphere and story, but it's rather disappointing that no characters feel connected to us in any way for anything other than to help us out in battles, fixing fuse boxes, which isn't always necessary, as some boxes is within Blake's skill set to be able to fix, so I guess it's just whenever the game decides you need an engineer, or when it's relevant for that to be the case, and also healing you as well. Throughout the game, you'll be going through cabins, vents, labs, towers, and a particularly notorious staircase section near the end of the game that has several sections where you can't avoid damage, no matter how many iframes you try and skip to avoid them. God damn it, Jesus, fuck. The problem is that the game employs a limited medical pack system, and it also has an archaic health system as well, in the sense that the health that you have lost during the level will carry on with you into the next level. And because of the fact that the staircase sequence happens sometime after the third boss in the game, it's unlikely you'll have any medical packs that you've held on to, and well, in that case, tough shit, unfortunately. I recommend using manual saves to try and circumvent the insta-kill areas with eventual luck, like what happened with me here. And I then fell into the vent, and I couldn't stop laughing after the death, because the fact is, they actually animated Blake's leg to appear as though it was bent when dying from falling in the vent. And it's almost like they knew that unsuspecting players would be thrown off guard by that. You can also, and you will have to, traverse the dome area and another tower before ending the game on a helicopter shooting Whitley as he turns into the creature. But let's talk about Whitley's transformation into the Thing. The dude wanted to make the infection become a widespread phenomenon like the zombie fairies in films like Day of the Dead. But he also stated that he learned how to control the infection, and that he said it cured his cancer. Well, maybe it did, wee man, but I'm afraid you forgot about the creature's weakness to fire. Bit of an oversight on that one, genius. Also, if it did cure cancer, wouldn't it be somewhat beneficial for it to become more widespread, even though you're hoping to wreak havoc with it? Let's be honest, the story blows, and because it's a sequel to The Thing, it's very disappointing because of that. There is no point in the game spending so much time on this story with so little payoff. I'll give it credit for honouring some of the themes from the original film, But this game also makes the Suffering Ties That Bind look like a Shakespearean masterpiece in terms of storytelling. Oh yeah, I need to review that game soon. I honestly wasn't expecting it to be as disappointing, but again, while the story may not be my cup of tea, maybe the gameplay will soften the blow, right? Before going into the gameplay, I want to mention that I used a mod with a few quality of life improvements such as HD, and by the looks of things, an attempt at a load game system that sadly did not work on my computer as it always crashed the game, but supposedly there was no load game feature in the vanilla release of the game, which is strange because some of these levels are egregiously long with only a few save points throughout, and they don't count as checkpoints, so the game natively expects you to reload or go to the main menu. Was it really that hard to implement a proper load game system? Along with the health not replenishing between areas, it just makes the game feel more dated than it already is, even especially when its more revolutionary ideas either fail full stop or fail the land in general. Which explains why the sequel could have been a great game with all the improvements the team had in mind. You tag up with various teammates who appear and disappear when the game decides it's no longer possible to bring them along, or when they no longer serve any purpose in the story, or at various points when the devs want to give you a different enemy to fight that just isn't another small creature over and over and over and over again. The beginning of the game shows the strongest elements of what the survival horror of the game could have been, a bit like another game I reviewed recently. However, unlike The Suffering, it doesn't try and capitalise on any of its appealing elements like the sparseness of enemies, or most importantly, show many different types of enemies throughout to keep the game from being stale. Instead, you'll fight a few big crawler enemies in specific areas that really are in short supply, and some NPCs who transform with 3 major boss fights, which are really disappointing, and then a final boss fight on a plane, which is somehow the only time McCready is in the game. A nice Easter egg to be sure, but wasted potential for something greater in my opinion. It is what it is, even if it isn't what you would like to see from such a legendary character. As you explore the cabins to find out more about the unknown forces that reside, you eventually come up against Pierce, which is the first time you need to prove you're not a creature by finding 3 blood kits, which take a litre of blood. I mean, is that not excessive? In the film, it was just a slither of blood from each teammate with a blowtorch used on it to see if the blood is threatened, like how the real thing is threatened by fire. I mean, they do explain how it works in the construct of this game, so it's fine, I guess, but I just think it would have been nice to see them, try and follow the movie logic a little bit more. But ultimately, this is just a nitpick at the end of the day. After a certain point, probably just before doing the blood test, the game mostly becomes an action horror game in the vein of Blood Rain with the action of Max Payne. They wanted to make the sequel a little more open world, and that would have been cool, but technology obviously limited them in this instance with everything else that they wanted to incorporate. But your arsenal is decent enough. You get a machine gun, pistol, blowtorch, which is rather imprecise because there isn't a lot of distance between Blake and the fire on his shoes, so don't be surprised if you die trying to kill monsters with this weapon. A shotgun which is powerful but reloads slowly. A flamethrower which is my preferred way of dispatching bigger enemies. And honestly, the game developers must have realised this, as there is a level later on, at least when the game is modded or on the PC version itself, when you get your weapons taken off you by Whitley when Blake is being examined on a table which has no straps to keep him there. Again, what the fuck? Apparently the native version had no repercussions from encountering Whitley at this point in the story, or at least the console version didn't, which again I'm glad to see is fixed in this mod I'm using. You can also find a grenade launcher, which is fantastic for using during the final stretch of this game, when you must tactically take out each of Whitley's mooks along with the sniper rifle, which they knew was essential to this section of the game, as they have ammo refills nearby when you leave the lift that leads into this level, and a taser that can be used if NPCs are too scared to get up and continue the journey. It jolts them, but the trouble is that they may lose trust in you. At least that's what the text blobs tell you. I only ever used adrenaline shots if a teammate got too scared, just to avoid any kind of mistrust from them. It didn't seem worth it. You move your mouse about to aim like in other third-person shooters at the time, and you can enter a first-person mode with no movement just to get some accurate shots, I guess, which works well enough depending on the weapon. If you think grenades can be thrown with greater accuracy in this mode, you are just hoping for a miracle that never materialises. I'd done my playthrough of hard mode, which I'd done to see if I could get a better understanding of the game after my first playthrough of normal mode. I didn't even realise you could use the I key to enter your inventory. I had just been using the scrolling wheel, which is great when you're on the fly, but sometimes it's more efficient to have the game paused just to avoid getting damage if the situation is too intense. Considering Blake is more than happy to run into gunfire, I'm not surprised he can be this reckless, as my gameplay is shown. How incredibly fitting I'm this bad. The level design is mostly linear with mission progression. You usually just have to find some kits here and there, discover more about the world itself, plant bombs in the radio room, for example, get everyone to trust you, especially engineers. You need them to complete the game, complete objectives such as finding Faraday, John Carpenter scientist, search for keys and passcodes to progress, and chasing Whitley by the end game, and these are just a few examples. The environments are mostly just small corridors that basically open up into bigger rooms now and again. For a horror game it works, but I really think a game based on the thing would certainly have benefited from a bigger and more open-ended environment, which was hinted at that was going to be in the sequel, where surprises are found in every corner. But as far as level design goes, I guess it does the job well enough. I like it when you must sneak around and use your sniper rifle to take out everybody in this section, or when you get to the section where you have to hit a switch that activates relevant switches in another room. And the reason why I like this section is because you get to fight a crawler before getting to this switch, and it's got bending corridors, and you have to be a little more stealthy with how you approach it when compared to other crawlers in the game. And I just thought it added a bit of suspense. This game was sorely lacking from the movie. The main problems I had with level design, to be honest, were the collision detection in certain sections, such as in boss rooms, was just like atrocious. Dealing with NPCs and creature encounters were just not good because the NPC often ran into trouble, and when it's an engineer, that means that game over, pretty much. So that added an extra layer of challenge that shouldn't have been there. And the occasional visual glitch as well happens, which I guess is just because the game's run on Windows 11 hardware. And of course, there are obtuse elements when it comes to how you progress. The beginning of the game confused me, for example, because I got embarrassed that I was asking this guy to fix the jukebox and nothing was happening. There was no command coming up, and I was thinking that maybe I got it wrong, but I knew that the cutscene had told me that this guy, fixes the boxes that you need when it's required. And then I realised that the problem was I didn't actually command him in the squad menu to follow me. I didn't even know that you had to do that or that it was a requirement. And I just thought to myself, and it was not the best first impression, I've already started this game, and with all the tutorials that I've had, I still ran into this roadblock. I mean, that's just unacceptable in my opinion, but, to each their own in this instance. It could have just been a me problem. I swear to God it was a game problem, though. The boss fights are also janky, right? So I almost always wanted to pull out my non-existent hair every time I encountered one of these monstrosities, and I don't mean that because of their appearance, which is obvious they are monstrosities, but anyway, seriously, you need medical packs and manual saves loaded up just to put up with this nonsense. It's almost as bad as the staircase section, with the only redeeming factor being that you can cheese most bosses, which isn't an ideal way of making the game technically solid, but if it helps me get closer to the end of this rather mediocre experience, I will take it.
I just want to get the hell out of here.
You said it, Blake. Wait, I liked something Blake said. It's impressive I can even remember his name, to be fair. The first time I played this game, I kept calling him Blair. I guess misremembering more interesting characters is just my thing. The first boss hits you immediately if you don't turn to the right almost instantaneously, and tons of tentacles get in the way of your attacks if you don't destroy them ASAP. And once defeating the first tier of the boss, you then must work out when to use the flamethrower, which is usually denoted by whether the reticle of your aim is red or not. This second one is just awful. The problem is that its aim is always perfect. You can't strafe around the boss like you can in the first one, and social distancing clearly isn't in this motherfucker's vocabulary. The idea is that you electrocute it to then pour fire onto it, but first you must pop some shots into it to get it into that weak state. I recommend trying to use grenades from afar on it, especially if you can locate a grenade launcher before entering the boss, which I was unsuccessful in doing, of course. But I did manage to throw a few orange grenades at it from afar that ended up destroying it, and sometimes it will end up destroying you using this approach, so just be wary of that. It wasn't as cathartic killing the beast as I would have liked, especially because it was the second time I did it here, and obviously, you know, I was just relieved it was over, to be quite frank with you. The third boss is annoying because you're underneath the creature popping shots into it, unless you want to die quickly every 5 seconds by strafing around it. You must also deal with one of the typical big monsters in this fight as well, just adding to the frustration. Can we make this game more frustrating? I guess the developers were thinking. If you're patient enough though, you will beat it. I recommend using a fire extinguisher and flamethrower approach. What I mean by this is you would use flamethrower on the creature, then immediately extinguish it with the fire extinguisher, of course, and then just keep using the flamethrower, fire extinguish, and basically this will add up the amount of damage the boss has taken, and it will end the fight much quicker, and you won't lose as much of the health being underneath it either. And you can thank me later for this if you are having trouble with this boss fight. But I would also recommend not playing the game, and you'll thank me more. To each their own about that, I guess. The final boss I already discussed, and it's basically just Whitley as a monster, and we use a machine gun on a helicopter piloted by McCready. It turns out it's easier than even the first boss, but ultimately challenging bosses are fine, you know, to me in most games, but not when the challenge comes from poor hit detection, limited health, and just causing yourself to explode randomly when you decide to throw a grenade. It feels like the bosses were an afterthought because they obviously didn't want your teammates to be in it, when I honestly think there would have been more tolerable if teammates were allowed in it. In fact, there's one moment where I accidentally glitched a team member into the third boss fight, and it's a bit easier for the 10 or so shots your teammate gets before he turns into a monster himself. You would honestly think the monsters would be as unique as they were in the movie, but evidently that wasn't meant to be, as with most things in this game. Since this review is basically about what the game could have been rather than what it was, the sting of not getting a sequel hits harder here. But I do think the team would have had the talent to redeem themselves with a sequel if given the chance, especially since McCready would have been in the sequel. At this point, the game was a major disappointment to me. Now, I want to say that as a game, it's perfectly playable, if a bit clunky, but as a sequel to the Thing movie, not to be confused with the original. The story has no right being this bad, in my opinion. The game has virtually no soundtrack either, which is a shame because the Ennio Morricone score may have actually been my favourite part about the John Carpenter movie, because it was foreboding and it made you feel like there was a sense of dread throughout even the most mundane of scenes, such as just looking at a mountain and then the music would play and allow your imagination to run wild with what it is to come. It's just wonderful. Also, the music during the scene as well. The Thing video game had the cheesiest music for the credits, and honestly it does have this zeitgeist feel to it that I can't actually hate, because I also wonder why they didn't honour the film by not having this kind of music in it. Occasionally during cutscenes you might hear a slight soundtrack here or there which is reminiscent of the film, but it's really the sound design of the environment monsters that we hear throughout which are serviceable, I would say. Overall, I find this game is a frustrating case of what could have been and what we got being either highly tedious, derivative, or frustrating at worst when it comes to certain bosses and objectives. The beginning of the game certainly had promise, but the rest of the game shows that sometimes an idea such as this game's squad mechanic isn't worth the trouble on limited hardware. It's not like a film where the less advanced effects can lead to greater creativity at times. In games, it's much more complicated when there are limitations on this kind of creativity, you know. And with all the scripted moments in the Thing video game, I think it's a damn shame that this game never got remade, so we could have seen what could have been in an unscripted The Thing video game. I want to make it clear that I think the Thing game can work. I mean, look at Among Us and how well the imposter system works there.
Come on.
Marcus! What? I meant to kill you.
And imagine this kind of multiplayer system in a game with squad members with all the Antarctic maps. It would be a major improvement over a linear action game experience like what we got here. The game isn't the worst game I've ever played, far from it, but I can't recommend it for everything I felt it gets wrong as an action game, and as a sequel, you might get a kick out of the polygonal environments. They actually are quite enjoyable to look at least for me. But the gameplay is just an exercise in frustration, and when it's not being frustrating, it suffers from tedious tasks and repetitive enemy designs, along with an infection system that feels like it couldn't be fully realised. It also changes rules from the film to fit the game, and such as how the thing has become a virus, which was never explicitly stated that it was a virus in the film, and the fact one character kills themselves before becoming the thing, as he alleges he's about to become, just raises more questions, because the whole point of the thing is that it's meant to be an imitation of a real human, so they wouldn't necessarily kill themselves in that instance. So what gives here? But then again, like I say, like, you know, you've got to follow, some liberties were taken, so rules won't necessarily be followed all the way through, but it would have been nice if they maybe adhered a little more to it. That's just my feeling. It doesn't make the game awful, but I just think it adds to a pile of disappointments that I had with it. In conclusion, the game is worse than I could have even imagined, and I certainly don't think it's the forgotten masterpiece that I've seen it being touted as in a few circles, at least to me. But it has a foundation worthy of retreading, like I agree with many other people who've said the same sort of thing, and I do think it could be improved in a remake or proper sequel in the vein of what we were meant to get. This is the end of my review. I hope you enjoyed watching. Many thanks for going through the whole video if you got to this point. Give this video a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more content like this. And with that, I bid you all adieu.